Physique assessment. The question our expert panel addresses is: what is the effect of client presentation on DXA assessment? Associate Professor Gary Slater.
So let's look at the potential impact of client presentation on a technique that we assume is a very robust, valid measure of body composition. The example we're going to use is DXA. I'm going to give you a real-world example of a client that I saw over a 12-week period. They were part of a boot camp or one of the very popular challenges where one of the main outcomes was to change their body composition. On the left-hand side here, we see part of the DXA scan report. Now what it shows, and we're actually going to go from the bottom of the screen, their body mass, their lean mass, their fat mass, and their percentage body fat results. We've got the absolute values before and after the 10 to 12 week challenge, and then the absolute changes. If we start with body mass, during that challenge, this individual put on 7.5 kilos. They put on 15 kilos, yes, 15 kilos of lean mass in a 10 to 12 week period. And at the same time, they had a decrease in their fat mass of 7.7 kilos. That ultimately resulted in over a 10% reduction in their percentage body fat. Now, is that physiologically possible? No, it's not. Even with the best anabolic agents in the world, that's not possible. So what happened? Well, this individual was highly intelligent. He had access to scientific journals. On our DXA scan wall, we have scientific papers that we've done research on ourselves to be able to show factors that influence body composition, especially fat-free mass. Because when we think about our skeletal muscle mass, we often think about it as being primarily protein. The reality is it's not. It's primarily water. And so if you can influence the water content of the muscles, then you influence the results. What we found out subsequently after dialogue with this individual, when we saw results that just weren't physiologically possible, he disclosed a couple of things to us. He'd consumed 2 litres of water just before his assessment. He'd put an IV line in the night beforehand and put over 1 litre of fluid in. He'd carbohydrate loaded. We know that every gram of carbohydrate that's stored in your muscles is stored with 3 grams of water. He also used creatine monohydrate loading for the 5 days beforehand. The solute, the creatine, goes into the muscles. Think back to your grade 10 biology. Through osmosis, that's going to draw more water into the muscles, and thus the huge change in regards to his fat-free mass. When questioned about all this, we thought we'd actually get a true indication of what's happened with his composition. And so when we look at that, when he's come in overnight fasted, glycogen replete, but not after carbohydrate loading, and allowing his muscle creatine stores to more moderate, we see that his composition and interpretation of that was very different. Rather than putting on almost 8 kilos of weight, he actually lost 2 kilos. They're real changes. His lean mass, he didn't put on 15.5 kilos, he'd gained 5.5 kilos. Now even that over a 10 to 12 week period is a phenomenal result. Is it possible in this individual? Probably. He'd come off a period of detraining. He'd been a prior elite athlete in a strength power sport. So genetically, he was very susceptible, well, likely to bloom. He had the potential to get big gains in muscle mass. The interesting one, though, was the changes in his fat mass. You remember he lost 7.7 kilos of fat during the intervention. 6 days later, when we reassessed his body composition, he'd lost 7.7 kilos of fat mass. So those changes in body water content had no impact on our interpretation of fat mass because the water content of the fat mass is so low. But manipulating the water content had a marked influence on our interpretation of his fat-free mass or his lean mass. Would we have seen the same sort of response with any of the other techniques? BOD-POD, bioelectrical impedance? Absolutely. Perhaps even to more of an extreme. So is client presentation important for interpretation of changes in composition? Absolutely. We need to ensure that a client prior to an assessment of body composition is suitably educated so that they come in and they're well hydrated, so they are glycogen replete. For females, we might also need to consider phase of menstrual cycle, because we know female sex hormones also influence our fluid regulatory hormones. But by taking into consideration all of those things, we can have so much more faith in the changes that we see. And this is all about being able to generate real, accurate information rather than being random number generators.
For further information on physique assessment, see our book, Best Practice Protocols for Physique Assessment in Sport, published by Springer.